After years of bloody battles, the world has finally found the long-awaited peace, all thanks to the extraordinary efforts of one man whose name is forever inscribed in the annals of history. That hero was Lee Ji-ho, an out-of-this-world warrior whose exploits are retold with special trepidation. He, a dragon slayer whose courage and bravery knew no bounds, became a key figure in the war against the demons, leading humanity to victory in this thrilling epic. But behind Lee Ji-ho's magnificent crown of fame was another, equally important facet of his life: his relationship with Nadia Balasit, known among the people as the Throwback. Their marriage, consummated long before Ji-ho took the hero's path, marked the beginning of a dramatic story in Nadia's life. This union, sealed with promises and hopes for a future together, heralded a series of events full of tragedy for Nadia. Even as a simple warrior, Ji-ho did not foresee how profoundly his life and the life of his beloved would be changed by the trials and victories that lay ahead of them. Their story, which began with love and hope, gradually built up layers of disappointments and hardships, emphasizing the sacrifices they both made for the common good and peace in their world. Nadia, overshadowed by the shadow of her origins, grew up as the daughter of a concubine, caught in the heart of family neglect and political intrigue. Her life was filled with hardships and challenges that were only exacerbated by her father's lack of acceptance. In this world, where every move and every word could be perceived as a maneuver in the struggle for power and attention, Nadia found herself in the role of a puppet whose suffering and struggle for a place in the sun went unnoticed. Being constantly compared to her sister, who seemed the epitome of the perfect offspring, Nadia experienced deep loneliness and misunderstanding from her own family. However, as in every story, there comes a moment when fate offers a chance to change everything. For Nadia, the turning point was a marriage proposal from Lee Ji-ho, a warrior from another world whose exploits had yet to be fully realized. This marriage promised not only a chance to break free from the oppression of family ties, but also a chance to win the long-awaited trust and respect of his father. Thus, the prospect of marriage to Lee Ji-ho became a light at the end of the tunnel for Nadia, a beacon of hope in an endless sea of doubt and uncertainty. This step, it seemed, could not only free her from the invisible shackles of the past, but also open the door to a new future where she would not just be the daughter of a concubine, but the respected and recognized wife of a hero. Ji-ho and Nadia's story is reminiscent of the classic tale of the power of love and sacrifice, of two people put in difficult circumstances, searching for their path to happiness despite all obstacles. Ji-ho, having been drafted to protect the kingdom, displayed amazing abilities and talents that made him not only a hero in the eyes of the people, but also a valuable asset to those seeking power and influence. The Duke, recognizing his potential, saw in Ji-ho's marriage to his daughter Nadia not just a union of two souls, but a strategic move that could strengthen his own position. Nadia, for her part, was caught between personal desires and her responsibilities to her family. She may not have originally chosen Ji-ho, but over time, her hopes that their life together could transcend the political game became a foothold for her. She dreamed of their relationship growing into a sincere love and mutual understanding where each of them could find support and comfort in each other against all odds. This situation presents them with many challenges. After all, in order to live as ordinary husband and wife, they will have to overcome not only external obstacles in the face of political intrigue and family expectations, but also internal, to learn to trust each other, to understand and accept in terms of not only duties, but also personal feelings. Their story speaks to the fact that even when it seems like choices are made for you by circumstances, there is always room for personal strength, choice, and the opportunity to build true, deep relationships. In one fateful moment, Nadia's life, once full of hopes and dreams, turned to a terrible reality. Finding herself in the cruel grip of fate, she was thrown behind bars into the gloomy room that became her prison home for long, seemingly endless hours and days. With each day spent in this confinement, she longed more and more for freedom, for the sense of ease and joy she had once felt. In these dark moments when despair seemed to be her only companion, Nadia invoked Ji-ho in her prayers, the very one she considered not just a friend but her savior, a beacon of hope in this darkness. However, When it seemed that all was lost and not a single ray of light could be seen out of the darkness, something unexpected happened. Her sister, whose key had long since lost its value in the world outside these walls, came to her. With an impenetrable expression, she opened the gates of the dungeon, promising freedom. But instead of joy and relief, those words brought only a new wave of despair. The sister announced that Ji-ho, once a near and dear person, was now a man of the highest rank, a key figure in their country's hierarchy. His life was full of new duties and responsibilities in which there was no longer any room for Nadia. Moreover, he had found a wife who matched his new position, rising above mere mortals in nobility and status. Those words were a cold shower to Nadia, shattering the last vestiges of hope in her wounded heart. The woman she had once dreamed of becoming was now out of reach, like a star too far away to reach. Nadia's certainty that the hands of her sister Karain and their mutual father were behind her troubles was not unfounded. This belief did not originate from nothing, but was cemented by a series of events, the latest of which struck the public to the deepest horror and disbelief. The scandal, which broke with unprecedented force, caused everyone to freeze in stunned and skepticism, for it seemed inconceivable that trust and close ties could be so cruelly betrayed. Karain, whose ambition and desire for power crossed all boundaries of sanity, turned to a devious and sophisticated plan to cut Nadia out of Ji-ho's life and take her place in one fell swoop. A gossip and schemer, she convinced Ji-ho to do the deed that was to be the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. At one of the balls organized for the elite of their world, Karain made sure that alcohol was poured into Nadia's glass. This was done cunningly and stealthily so that when Nadia, under the influence of alcohol, could not keep up and fell asleep, a man would be found beside her. Karain, standing in front of Nadia like the embodiment of duplicity and the intricacies of fate, provided a different perspective on the disaster that had occurred, unfolding the story in such a way that the roots of the plot stretched back to Ji-ho himself. She claimed that the idea to discredit Nadia came directly from Ji-ho, for whom marriage to a concubine's daughter was a stain on his reputation as a hero. According to Karain, if Ji-ho had gone the route of a simple divorce, it would have been a blow to his own image in the public eye. Hence, the only way out he saw was to frame Nadia in such a way that the blame would fall on her, and his reputation would remain intact. In this tangle of words and accusations, Karain took a sudden, unexpected turn, stating that her intentions were not as callous as they might seem. She claimed to have come to offer Nadia one last chance at happiness, but that chance was bleak and final. At her signal, the men whose job it was to execute the most tragic of all possible outcomes, to kill Nadia in order to put her out of her misery, entered the room. This act, presented by Karain as mercy, was in fact the culmination of cruelty and indifference to human life, revealing the depth of her willingness to walk over corpses to achieve her goals. Thus, Karain presented herself not just as an executor of someone else's will, but as a cold-blooded strategist, ready to take the most extreme measures to remove obstacles in her way. Her words and actions are shrouded in an aura of betrayal and manipulation, turning her meeting with Nadia into the final act of a drama full of deceit and betrayal. In one of the darkest and most tragic turns of events, Karain ruthlessly revealed her plot, the essence of which was to have Nadia's death presented as an act of lynching. With this devious plan, she sought not only to preserve the outward gloss and honor of the family clan, but also to free Ji-ho from the bonds of a marriage in which she believed he was unhappy. Nadia herself, whose life and reputation were doomed to become pawns in this game of high society, was designated as the sole victim of this dark conspiracy. Fear in the face of her own doom enveloped Nadia with a coldness that penetrated to the marrow. Death was an outcome she would not reconcile herself to. At that moment, standing on the threshold of eternity, her thoughts whirled back to the past, to her endless attempts to win the love and approval of her father, or at least the tolerance of her stepmother, under whose iron control she felt deprived of the right even to breathe. All these years, Karain had taken from Nadia without the slightest remorse everything that could bring her joy or meaning, from her carefree childhood to the little things that made up her little world. So, in this maelstrom of events, Nadia's life appeared to her as a series of endless trials and losses, where each search for recognition and love turned into a new disappointment. And now, as Corinne prepared to destroy the last crumbs of her dignity without a shadow of a doubt, turning death into a spectacle to satisfy her own selfish ends, Nadia felt a deep despair. Unexpectedly, fate presented Nadia with an amazing opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. In one beautiful yet mysterious moment, she found herself transported back in time about 3 years before the supposed moment of her death. This inexplicable turn of events seemed like a miracle. She felt the dark shadows of death that had just enveloped her dissolve into thin air, leaving behind only the echoes of former fears. Now that everything seemed to be in order, Nadia felt the strength and determination she had lacked earlier. A chance for retribution, an opportunity for justice and revenge against those who were responsible for her suffering, opened up before her. This moment in time was for Nadia a kind of crossroads of destinies, where past and future were woven into one continuous pattern of possibilities. She was burning to take this second opportunity to confront Ji-ho, the very man she had once been willing to do anything for, but who, as it turned out, didn't deserve an ounce of her loyalty. Her heart filled with anger at the thought of her sister, whose cold and cruel merriment echoed in her memories, echoing with sharp pain for every moment of her betrayal. Equally great was the pain of realizing that her own father, who should have been a pillar of support and protection, had used her as a pawn in his selfish pursuits. With this newfound understanding and the ability to act, Nadia was determined not to let herself be used. She was going to reveal the true faces of those who hid behind masks of decency and caring, to show the world their true indifference and cruelty. A plan was brewing in her heart as to how she could use her knowledge of the future and her new powers to turn the situation in her favor, restore her name and dignity, and most importantly, get revenge. Thus, having found an unexpected chance for retribution, Nadia became a symbol not only of tragedy, but also of hope for rebirth and an opportunity to change her fate, proving to everyone that even in the darkest circumstances, light can be found. At the moment when Nadia, absorbed in her reflections on the second chance in life she had been given, was standing before the mirror, a maid entered the room. This unexpected visit brought turmoil to the girl's already confused feelings. The maid remarked, with obvious disapproval in her voice, that Nadia risked dirtying all the mirrors around her, for her attention was focused not on her own reflection, but on the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her head. But when the two women's gazes met, Nadia felt as if she had been hit. Her eyes widened with shock and bewilderment. In front of her stood none other than the very maid who, at one of the decisive moments of the social ball, had slipped her a drink containing alcohol. This was not just a gesture of innocent mirth or a harmless joke. This action had far-reaching consequences that left an indelible mark on Nadia's life. That meeting was a turning point that not only threw Nadia into a whirlwind of events, unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, but also forced her to rethink her views on many aspects of her own existence. The thoughts and feelings that had been tightly woven into the pattern of her inner world were suddenly scattered all over her mind, like leaves scattered by a sudden gust of wind. That moment of discovery, when Nadia recognized in the face of the maid the one who had unknowingly pushed her to rethink her own life, made her heart beat faster. Facing the past in the person of this woman has brought new intrigue into Nadia's already complicated life, promising new discoveries and perhaps even reconciliation with aspects of existence that had previously seemed insurmountable to her. As if in defiance, Nadia made the sudden decision to ignore the maid who sought her attention. With that decision, she stepped into the long hallway where her footsteps echoed through its silence. There, among the gold jewelry and portraits of her ancestors, she was met by the head of the maids. This meeting brought news. Nadia's father was waiting for her. In spite of all past grievances and disagreements, Nadia did not hesitate. She headed towards him, crossing the thresholds of the rooms, each one filled with memories of the past. Nadia felt something unusual when she met her father. The previous apprehension and fear of his gaze seemed to vanish into thin air. Standing in front of him, she realized that she no longer felt the overwhelming fear that used to restrain her every time they met. It was more than courage or determination, it was like an inner epiphany. She saw in his eyes not only the image of an overbearing parent, but also of a man who had committed a betrayal. And that realization gave her strength. Nadia felt that now she was able to stand in front of him without lowering her gaze, ready to say everything she'd been holding back for a long time. This moment was a turning point in their relationship. Not just a meeting between daughter and father, but a collision of two worlds. The old one, where fear and submission ruled, and the new one, where Nadia could feel strong and independent. The Duke, who stood at the pinnacle of his position of power, called Nadia to him for a very significant reason. In the heart of his castle, a solemn ceremony was being prepared that promised to be the culmination of long-standing traditions and new beginnings. Nadia, who has not only aristocratic blood but also inner strength, was chosen to play a role with a special meaning. At this event, she was to bestow a wreath on Ji-ho, a warrior whose fame and dignity had already become legendary. This tradition, which has its roots in the deep past, was much more than just the giving of an award. It symbolized the recognition of deep feelings. Such an award was tantamount to an open declaration of love between the one giving the award and the one receiving it. Nadia thus found herself in the spotlight, not only as the Duke's daughter, but also as a key figure in this ancient rite, which added weight to her participation in the ceremony. The award ceremony will be attended by a warrior from the north, which is an enemy of their empire, and so the Duke has decided to use Nadia to pull the focus on her with Ji-ho. His intention was to shift the focus of public attention through this seemingly personal and emotional gesture to Nadia, thus strengthening his political position and creating new opportunities for further maneuvers on the big chessboard of the international aristocracy. That afternoon, as the aroma of freshly brewed tea spread softly through the air, Nadia and her companions made their way to Karain, who was lovingly and carefully preparing the table for the upcoming tea party. This was not just a gathering of dignitaries, it promised to be a pivotal moment in the delicate game between the various forces weaving around the royal court. They were all greeted by the king himself, whose majesty and nobility could not leave anyone in his presence indifferent. The king, the lord and sage, had not unreasonably shared that the expeditionary force that Ji-ho was a part of had expressed a desire to have a triumphant ceremony. The Duke, full of fine tact and diplomacy, presented as if this news came as a complete surprise to him, though his mind and calculation always went several steps ahead. In the conversation, it was voiced that their worst enemy, a northerner known as the Marquis of Winterfell, was lurking among the members of this squad. The name was alarming and feared, for his actions could undermine stability and peace in their lands. The king, whose words always carried weight and determination, expressed the need to rid himself of such a threat. The Duke, in turn, proposed an unusual yet exquisite solution to the problem at hand: to find the Marquis of Winterfell a wife. The move was ingenious in its versatility. Not only could it disarm a potential threat, but it also fit into the complex political and social dances performed in the halls and fields of their world. The Duke's proposal was yet another proof of his strategic thinking, his ability to seek unconventional ways of solving even the most confusing issues, which was sure to leave a significant imprint on further events in their kingdom. In the silence of her retreat, Nadia plunges into deep reflection, recalling the vicissitudes of her past life. The events follow one after another like a kaleidoscope. A happy wedding day with Ji-ho, which seemed to be the beginning of a new and promising chapter in her life. However, as in many stories, the happiness was fleeting. The Marquis of Winterfell, having seen Nadia's example, decided to follow tradition and also entered into marriage. But the Duke made the choice for the Marquis, proposing a girl whose fate turned out to be tragic. This girl, found for the Marquis, could find no comfort in her new position and spent her days drowning in tears, which eventually led her to the desperate act of running away. This moment was a turning point in Nadia's thoughts. The realization of her own powerless position, similar to that of the unfortunate companion of the Marquis of Winterfell, makes her heart sink with horror. Suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, the thought strikes her that there may be a way to avoid the same fate. A plan begins to brew in her mind, a plan to take the place of the girl who escaped from the Marquis of Winterfell, thus freeing herself from the shackles of her marriage to Ji-ho and preventing her inevitable doom. So, standing on the threshold of decisions that will determine her fate, Nadia plunges into deep thoughts about the future. She realizes that her actions could lead to dramatic changes, not only in her life, but also in the lives of those around her. A spark of hope flares in her heart, a spark ready to explode into a flame of determination leading to a new path, a path of freedom and self-determination. In a hall where the walls had witnessed many historical events, the king's voice rang out, filled with the seriousness and importance of the moment. His question, addressed to the Duke, sounded like an echo of fate. Would there be brave hearts willing to join their fate with a northerner for the greater good, for the prosperity and safety of their common homeland? The Duke, steadfast and unwavering, with a dignity that emphasized the weight of his words, assured her that there would be more than one father willing to offer his daughter's hand in marriage for a noble cause, for the sake of the country. At that moment, like a flash of lightning in a dark sky, Nadia decides to act. The boldness of her decision, like herself, leaves the whole room breathless. Standing up to make her wish known, she addresses the king with a proposal so unexpected that time seemed to stand still in the air. Her words, spoken clearly and confidently, echoed off the walls, startling everyone present. She, the daughter of a duke, is ready to take up the challenge and become the one who will determine the future of the country by her choice to marry a northerner. Such an act, a reflection of true love for his country and a willingness to take fate into his own hands, is admired by the king. Her proposal, so decisive and courageous, becomes a symbol of sacrifice and patriotism, inspiring those present to new feats for the good and prosperity of their great homeland. There was tension in the air as the angry Duke, like a storm on the eve of a rampage, tried to convey his burning disagreement to Nadia through a fog of innuendo. His words, filled with worry and anxiety, should have been a sign for her to stop, to rethink her intentions, which seemed extremely dangerous to him. After all, the long-standing feud between his family and the Winterfells was known to anyone with any familiarity with the politics of these lands. The king, the great arbiter and judge in disputes between nobles, could not disagree with the Duke, emphasizing that the union of Nadia and the Marquis of Winterfell promised to be a trial full of obstacles and thorns. However, Nadia, despite all the warnings and advice, found the strength to offer a bold solution that could break down the walls of misunderstanding and hostility. With clarity and determination in her eyes, she floated the idea that at the upcoming ceremony, she would give the wreath not to Jiho, the man whose name would be the expected choice, but to the Marquis of Winterfell. Such a gesture, she believed, would be a symbol of unity and reconciliation, for by tradition, ingrained in the hearts and minds of all present, at a ceremony of this kind it never occurred to anyone to refuse the honor offered. Nadia believed that in this way, she could lay the foundation stone of a new future for their homes, a future where enmity would give way to mutual understanding and cooperation. In that tense moment when the air in the room seemed electrified with anticipation, the father, concealing beneath the surface of his calmness a storm of feeling, recalled with reproach the long-standing agreement. It was customary in their family to negotiate important moments in advance, and it had already been decided that Nadia would be the one to present the wreath to Jiho, thus symbolizing honor and recognition. Nadia, however, did not hesitate to bring a weighty argument in her defense, wittily observing that the Marquis, whose opinion in society carried considerable weight, had personally expressed a desire to be awarded to her. She coldly emphasized that refusing her would not only be impossible, but would have serious consequences for the Marquis's reputation. After all, if he allows himself to show disagreement with her decision, it could be a blow to his image in the eyes of the public. Her words cut through the silence, hinting that a refusal or even the slightest hesitation in his decision could cause his name to be erased from people's memories, as if he had never been the hero everyone looked up to with admiration. Nadia, standing in front of her father, was not just a daughter demanding permission. She appeared as a strategist who clearly understood the importance of using the situation to her advantage, and was willing to play on the feelings and expectations of the high-ranking Marquise to achieve her goals. In the course of this intricate intrigue, the Duke, whose words have always weighed heavily in political circles, introduced another decisive argument. He argued that in the event that even the king would personally step in and put pressure on the Marquis, the latter would have no chance of refusal. Nadia, quick on her feet and witty in her reasoning, latched onto the idea immediately. She put forward the idea that such a course of events would not only deepen the Marquise's predicament, but also greatly enhance the reputation of the king himself. Her argument was that the monarch, by compromising with the daughter of one of his subjects, would show himself as a magnanimous and noble ruler, which would undoubtedly have a positive effect on public opinion of him. The king, thoughtfully weighing Nadia's proposal, could not immediately decide on an answer. He turned to the Duke, seeking his opinion on the matter. The Duke, in spite of the inward resistance and indignation that almost boiled within him, comprehending the depth and elegance of Nadia's scheme, subdued his anger through force. He recognized that the plan did have merit and might bear unexpected fruit. His consent, though given through gritted teeth, was the last brick in the foundation of this clever strategy. Thus, in this multiplayer game, each character, whether Duke, King, or Nadia herself, discovered his or her role in an alliance forged toward a common goal, where mutual benefit proved to be the link between their disparate interests. After the royal caravan disappeared over the horizon, a tense atmosphere remained in the air, which seemed to foreshadow a storm. Karain, agitated and worried, couldn't help but express her displeasure to Nadia for her decision to leave the safe walls of home and travel north to the lands where enemies ruled. Her words were full of resentment at the ruined plans. However, the conversation was abruptly interrupted by her father. Strict and unforgiving, he demanded an explanation from Nadia as to why she had dared to ignore his order. Nadia, faced with the need to justify her choice to her father, weighed every word. Her arguments had to be strong. She boldly stated that her decision was based on a deep conviction to combine her destiny with a man from another world, when the blood of the ducal family runs in her veins, would be a betrayal of her heritage and her own essence. She tried to convince her father that her actions were not unreasonable, but instead stemmed from a desire to preserve her family's honor and dignity. But her words, full of determination and honor, did not resonate in her father's heart. His reaction was cold and detached, as if an icy wind had swept between them, leaving a gaping chasm of misunderstanding in its wake. This moment was a test for their relationship, because the father, accustomed to unconditional obedience, expected his daughter to obey, not to make independent decisions so far from his own beliefs. There was tension in the air as the Duke, gripped by excitement and discontent, faced the prospect of ceding the glory of his home to a sworn enemy. At the same time, Nadia, enveloped in an aura of courage and determination, felt the cold touch of fear on her, sensing the impending change. However, in the depths of her soul, a plan was brewing that could avert the catastrophe hovering in the air like a dark cloud before the storm. With words of despair and hope at the same time, Nadia turned to the Duke. She claimed that her marriage to the Marquis could be the key to preventing the rebellion that hovered in the air as an invisible threat. Her words, full of determination and courage, were not just empty words. They were backed by knowledge. For Nadia carried within her the memory of a past life where the royal family, now puppets in the game of greater powers, were under the hidden control of enemies. And it was this knowledge that gave her confidence in her words. The Duke, who lived in constant fear of an uprising from the provinces, took her words seriously. Nadia, using her knowledge of the current political climate and the vulnerability of the royal family, decided to play on the Duke's fear of internal rebellion. Her proposal to become the wife of a marquis, and thus pave the way to stabilize the situation in the kingdom, represented a risky, but the only possible step to preserve peace and order in their lands. As the majestic hall echoed with every spoken word, the Duke, surrounded by an aura of power and determination, fell into deep thought. Nadia's words, spoken with convincing logic, resonated in his mind, becoming the turning point in their unusual encounter. The decision to send Nadia to the Marquis seemed to him a move worthy of a game of chess. She would become his eyes and ears, his spy in hostile lands. With that thought, he finally agreed, making a decision that Karain, as the other supporter of this conspiracy room, could not believe. The mention of Karain Ji-ho swept through the hall like a whirlwind, but the Duke, without losing his dignity, replied with unexpected calmness. As if he had the magical ability to find a way out of any situation, he assured Ji-ho that there would be a worthy bride for him as well. In this way, he not only solved Nadia's problem, but also promised to resolve the issue that was troubling Karain. Then, addressing Nadia directly, the Duke looked at her with a penetrating gaze full of skepticism and distrust. His voice, filled with authority and secret interest, echoed through the room as he asked what she really wanted. This moment was a test for Nadia, a test of her sincerity and faithfulness to her words. Nadia, standing in the face of authority, gathering all her resolve, replied that her deepest and most sincere desire was freedom. This word, spoken in the hall like the cry of a soul yearning for light and air, left a sense of a hanging pause in the air. Nadia stated that she believed in the Duke's victory over the Marquis of Winterfell, and when that happened, she wished to go free, living as a wealthy widow on the Marquis' money. The cool air refreshed Nadia's face as she, lost in her musings, strolled slowly down the long, winding corridor of the Grand Palace. She reflected on her current life, which she felt was working out quite well, considering it a sort of second chance. In this new life, she managed to avoid her previous mistakes and move forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind her. However, despite these successes, her mind kept her on her toes, constantly plotting and scheming. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to what was happening outside the window. There was a drama playing out outside, in the middle of the spacious courtyard, that instantly captured her thoughts. The maid who displeased her was being punished for stealing an item belonging to Nadia. The irony of the situation was that Nadia herself was the secret director of this vile spectacle, for it was she who had planted the stolen object on the unfortunate maid in order to get rid of one of Karain's pawns in their multifarious game of intrigue. This moment of impetus filled Nadia with a new excitement. She was already anticipating the sweetness of the revenge she was preparing for her opponents. Cunning plans began to ripen in her mind on how to further spin her insidious web around those who dared to cross her path. The realization that she had successfully rid herself of one of the obstacles in her path only increased her thirst for further victories and triumphs in this shadowy game of influence and power. Nadia paced further down the corridor, absorbed in her grim musings of a future where every step she took was calculated to bring her closer to her cherished goal of complete victory over all her enemies. A majestic atmosphere filled the air as the day of the long-awaited ceremony arrived. The sun rose, illuminating the square where all the invitees had already gathered, and at that moment the Marquis, dressed in his finest clothes, stepped forward. His stride was full of determination and confidence as he prepared to lead the knights to the pedestal where the solemn action was to take place. All the details of this moment seemed strictly organized and thought out to the last detail, from the splendor of the robes to the precise seating arrangements of each participant. Sitting back in her seat, Nadia looked around at the scene before her and realized that everything that was happening was an exact replica of events from her past life. This moment of revelation struck her. The realization that if she had not intervened in her destiny, there would have been no change in her life at all. Everything would have been the same as it was before, without a single deviation. In this moment of reflection, Karain, as if fate incarnate, reminded Nadia to return the pendant after the ceremony. This pendant, of special value to Nadia because it belonged to her mother, was at the center of their agreement. Karain's demand for the return of such a significant amulet, even despite its personal value to Nadia, emphasized the cruel rules of the game in their world, where personal feelings and affections could be used as tools in manipulation and intrigue. This moment in the ceremony was not just a reminder of the past for Nadia, but also of the challenges still to come on the road to her goals. All these events filled her with determination and desire to achieve a new future in which she can change her destiny and the destinies of those around her, overcoming obstacles, including through making hard decisions, such as giving up the precious pendant that links her to the past and her family. In this chapter of the story, the narrative unfolds around Nadia, who finds herself in the midst of exciting events. Her gaze involuntarily slid from the Marquis to the figure standing behind his back. Ji-ho, the key character from the past events, who, in another life, had become the hero of the ceremony. Nadia recalls how they were married not out of the calculation of their hearts, but rather because of circumstances. But even then, amidst the formalities and officialism, she felt an invisible thread binding their souls. This bond was both a source of comfort and deep pain for her, for it was Ji-ho's betrayal that caused her early demise. Nadia's feelings were complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, The memory of the brief moments of sincere understanding and closeness still lived in her heart, and on the other hand, the bitter realization of betrayal, which left a deep wound on her soul. Those memories, mixed with the feeling of an invisible connection, made her heart clench with pain at the thought of the past. While Nadia was immersed in her musings, the ceremony they were all at reached its climax. The Marquis, one of the central actors in this important procedure, assumed a respectful kneeling position before the lord of their lands, the king. This act was full of symbolism and tradition, reflecting a deep-rooted hierarchy and respect for monarchical authority. Thus, before the audience unfolds a dramatic picture, where the past and the present are intertwined in the fabric of the fate of the main characters, and every gesture and look is filled with deep meaning, leaving in the hearts of unforgettable impressions. With majestic grace, the king noted that the Marquis had not just accomplished his mission, he had exceeded expectations, displaying bravery and determination worthy of the legendary heroes of the past. His words carried a note of respect for the Marquis's father, a magnificent knight whose exploits remain in the memory of those who appreciate true skill and honor. The king mentioned with bitterness the present condition of the Marquis's father, bedridden by infirmity, but with the hope that his spirit rejoiced in his son's successes, even while in the grip of disease. This moment was particularly harrowing for the Marquis. For the king, as if he knew where to direct his gaze, touched the very soul of the young hero, reminding him of the great loss and at the same time of the incalculable pride his father must feel. The air in the square vibrated with tension and anticlimax as the king finally moved on to the final act of the day, the beginning of the ceremony. The moment the king's last words dissolved into thin air, the hall was filled with a sense of grandeur and importance of what was happening. The hearts of those present beat in unison with every movement, every gesture with which the king emphasized the significance of the moment. The Marquis stood before the audience as a living symbol of courage and nobility, while the ceremony, slowly unfolding before the eyes of all present, became not a mere formality, but a true reflection of the age of heroes and legends living among them. The decisive moment of the ceremony had arrived, a time when all the air in the square seemed electrified in anticipation of an event that could change the course of history. Nadia, the key figure of the moment, was preparing to present a wreath, a symbol of recognition and respect, a choice that would be the epitome of favor and recognition of merit to all gathered. The Marquis, one of the chief figures of the event, stood among the attendees, filled with mixed feelings. His gaze, full of expectation, was fixed on Nadia. He was aware of the importance of the moment, but deep down he felt alienated, for he was sure that he was not the one to choose. Everyone knew that Nadia's father was supporting Ji-ho, a noble and worthy opponent, which only strengthened the Marquis in his belief that this was the man who would receive the honor he deserved. The Marquis had set himself up to be stoic about the outcome. He was ready to peacefully accept the decision in favor of Ji-ho, quietly consoling himself with the hope that his efforts in the expedition would at least be adequately rewarded. At that moment, something unexpected suddenly happened that disrupted the flow of his thoughts. Nadia, as if ignoring all unspoken assumptions and expectations, walked right up to the Marquis. Her act was so unexpected that the Marquis was speechless for a moment. He could not believe that he had become the center of attention at such a critical moment. Trying to recover from the sudden turn of events and believing that some mistake had been made, the Marquis hastily whispered to Nadia, pointing at Ji-ho, that perhaps she had mistaken the recipient of such a high honor. There was a note of confusion and bewilderment in his voice, for he could not understand how such a plot twist was possible in reality, where every step seemed predetermined. In this unpredictable turn of events, when the tension in the air had reached its climax, Nadia, standing before the Marquis, uttered words that sounded like thunder. With confidence and clarity, she announced that no mistake had been made. Nadia revealed her feelings, confessing to the Marquis the deep affection that had possessed her at first sight. These words sounded completely unexpected to the Marquis, for he had not imagined that their interaction could go beyond a formal relationship. The Marquis, stunned and somewhat bewildered by such a confession, hastened to interrupt Nadia. His reaction was sharp, and he asked a question repulsive in its directness. Did she realize the full extent of what she was saying, confessing such a deep feeling? This moment was a test for both, for Nadia, who was trying to escape from home, and for the Marquis, who was faced with having to make a decision in a situation that seemed absurd to him. Despite his resistance, Nadia did not hesitate to present the Marquis with a wreath, a sign of her choice and recognition of his special status. This gesture made the situation even more solemn, and the king, who did not miss the opportunity, decided to intervene, according to plan. He began to incite the Marquis to accept Nadia's proposal, which added spice to the situation. The Marquis, finding himself the center of everyone's attention and under pressure from the king, felt the weight of having to make a choice fall on his shoulders. Despite the incitement and expectations of those around him, he chose not to give in to insistence and to resist. This choice emphasized his inner struggle and his desire to preserve his dignity in the face of an unforeseen challenge. At a moment when the atmosphere of growing tension seemed unbearable, Nadia took an unexpected step that turned the tide. She addressed a confession to the Marquis of Winterfell, which was calculated to elicit the sympathy and support of the people present. By boldly declaring her origin, she emphasized that the Marquis had the right to reject the feelings of such a concubine's daughter as herself. These words from Nadia caused an instant reaction among the crowd. The air was filled with unhappy cries, and emotions surged with renewed vigor. Public opinion immediately tilted in favor of Nadia, and people unanimously began to demand that the Marquis accept her love, thus showing their respect and support for the girl who opened her heart to everyone. Realizing the full weight of the situation and feeling the growing pressure from others, the Marquis found the strength to make a decisive step. By accepting the wreath from Nadia's hands, he signified his agreement and, in effect, an acknowledgement of her feelings. This gesture was a symbolic sign of his acceptance of the challenge he was facing. The Marquis' acceptance of the wreath was not merely a victory for Nadia in her quest to win his heart, it was also a victory for the crowd over human reason. At that moment, in the face of the assembled crowd, the Marquis and Nadia together rewrote the rules of a game in which false feelings proved stronger than any barriers. In the darkness of the night, when the stars had already ascended to their invisible throne and the moon illuminated the earth with its pale light, the Duke, clad in his best clothes, made no secret of his admiration for his daughter. He smiled slyly, noting her ability to pressure the Marquis, which was part of their delicate and cunning plan. This night was to be the pinnacle of their triumph, the moment of their victory in the long game for influence and power. However, just as father and daughter were exchanging compliments, their conversation was suddenly interrupted. Ji-ho ran up to them at a furious speed, his face distorted with disappointment and obvious displeasure. This young man, whose eyes burned with the fire of misunderstanding and resentment, was shocked by the outcome of the ceremony, expecting a very different outcome. His heart beat in unison with each step he took as he approached the Duke, demanding an explanation. Ji-ho couldn't bear the thought that the wreath, a symbol of respect and recognition, should have ended up in his hands. But for some unknown reason, it was handed to the Marquis. Why? Echoed the question in his mind, demanding answers from the Duke. The Duke, remaining unperturbed in the face of this sudden challenge, chose the path of brevity in his explanations. It just so happened, those words echoed in the air, filling him with the weight of inevitability. Duke claimed that the rush and inability to notify Ji-ho in advance forced him to change his original plans. As a consolation, he proposed another bride to Ji-ho, trying to smooth out the sharp edges of the situation. But Ji-ho, whose feelings were deeply hurt, could not accept this turn of events calmly. It was not so much the Duke's choice that irritated him, but the very fact of the change of plans that undermined his expectations and hopes. In the middle of the night, when the air was saturated with tension, Ji-ho, overwhelmed with emotion, almost crossed the line, risking giving away the Duke's extremely important secret. This point was so critical that the Duke, losing for a moment his usual restraint, could not refrain from a loud exclamation. His words, "Nothing can be changed anymore," cut through the night silence like a lightning bolt through the sky, leaving behind an echo of immutability. However, almost immediately after his outburst of anger, the Duke regained his diplomatic tone, confidently assuring Ji-ho that all his efforts and expectations would be rewarded, that everything would be compensated. These words brought comfort, promising justice in a world where the rules were constantly changing. After a brief but sharp exchange, a slight tension hovered between the Duke and Ji-ho, the spark of discontent still lingering, but the guy finally accepted the Duke's words. With some reluctance, but recognizing the futility of further argument, Ji-ho withdrew, leaving behind the promise of an uncertain future. The Duke, however, having calmed down after this unforeseen incident, made his way to his carriage with his daughters, preparing to depart. However, before disappearing into the night, Nadia, whose attentiveness and intuition were always at an all-time high, turned her attention to Ji-ho. Even though he was about to leave, his gaze was still fixed on her. This moment, when their gazes crossed for the last time before parting, was filled with many unspoken words and emotions. There was something in his eyes that Nadia couldn't quite pinpoint, whether it was resentment, bewilderment, or hope that her father's promises would be fulfilled. Nadia, with a slight hesitation in her heart, stepped over the threshold of the carriage, immersing herself in its cozy furnishings. At this moment, she realized that the chapter of her life, where Ji-ho played no small part, had been irrevocably turned. Her decision to no longer let him into her inner world was final. Ji-ho, despite all the past moments they had shared, had been the first to allow himself to be betrayed, and in that, Nadia saw enough reason to finally let go of those memories, like fluff carried away by the wind. Meanwhile, within the walls of the grand Winterfell mansion, the Marquis was immersed in a completely different atmosphere. His faithful assistant, the man on whose word the Marquis always relied, was sharing the latest news. The social ether was buzzing with rumors and speculation about Nadia's public expression of her feelings for the Marquis, which became a topic of discussion in all corners of high society. It was an event that could not be dismissed, and now the Marquis was faced with the need to determine how he should react to this unexpected turn of events. This information instilled in the Marquis a sense of responsibility for the decisions to come. He realized that his reaction would have a significant impact not only on his personal life, but also on his social standing. At this moment, when rumors of Nadia's love for him spread with incredible speed, the Marquis felt the burden of future events falling on his shoulders, demanding not only diplomacy, but also true nobility of actions. In the shadows of the magnificent interior of Winterfell Mansion, the Marquis, whose facial features reflected deep thoughtfulness, held out to his assistant a letter whose seal symbolized the highest degree of attention. It was from the royal family. The content of the letter was shrouded in a thin veil of diplomacy, but its essence was clear as day, a hint of marriage between the Marquis and Nadia. The aide's reaction was not long in coming. He erupted in waves of indignation, piercingly realizing that the Marquis now faced only one course of action. With each word from the aide expressing bewilderment and criticism of this veiled edict, the air grew more tense. He could not hide his disappointment, as he felt that such a decision was unfair to the Duke, who, in his opinion, had worked tirelessly for the good of the country. But the Marquis, weighing every word of his faithful attendant, sank deeper and deeper into thought of his next move. He realized that behind the proposal of the royal family hid not just a political game, but also an attempt by the Duke to use the situation for his own purposes, seeking to accuse the Marquis of rebellion. The Marquis realized that his every action was now more important than ever and would have far-reaching consequences not only for himself, but for the entire country. He felt the stares of everyone from the common people to the highest-ranking aristocrats awaiting his decision. At this moment, time seemed to slow down and each second stretched into eternity, while the Marquis gathered his strength to make a decision that could change the course of history. In an ancient castle where history left its mysterious traces on every carved panel and in every secret passage, the fate of the Marquis was inextricably linked to a series of tragic events. The successive misfortunes that had befallen the predecessors of the current Marquis had added a somber note to the atmosphere of the family nest. The current owner of the title, a man with a determined eye and equally determined convictions, was convinced that the mysterious series of accidents that had claimed the lives of his ancestors had not been an accident. His suspicions pointed unerringly to one man, the Duke, an enemy possessed of both an unyielding desire to dominate and a cunning in the accomplishment of his purposes. The Marquis believed that the Duke was plotting another devious game, this time using feelings and emotions as weapons. Suspicion gripped the Marquis's heart when Nadia, a woman with a mysterious past and equally mysterious intentions, suddenly appeared in his life. Her sudden love seemed to him not merely a strange coincidence, but a carefully planned act through which the Duke sought to introduce a spy into his house. The heart of the Marquis was troubled by this supposition, for every glance of Nadia, every action of hers, might be part of the Duke's dark plan. The loyalty and devotion of the Marquis's assistant knew no bounds. He followed his master without lagging behind, ready to support him in any situation. He shared an observation that might have shed some light on Nadia's true motives. According to eyewitnesses, Nadia's original purpose was to present a wreath to Ji-ho, but the latter's reaction to the gesture was so genuinely surprised that it left no room for doubt that he was not involved in any devious plans. This moment of surprise, recorded by witnesses, seemed to add another pattern to the complex mosaic of relationships between the characters, making it even more confusing as to who was really behind Nadia's sudden love and what was the true purpose of her appearance in the Marquis's life. The moment the Marquis realized the depth of the situation that had unfolded in all its inevitability at the ceremony, he realized that his preliminary assessments had been correct. Fate had set the stage, and now he was faced with the inevitable choice of having to marry Nadia. His assistant, however, seemed far more alarmed by this turn of events than the Marquis himself. However, the Marquis, possessing not only aristocratic calmness, but also the coolness of a strategist, managed to convince his aide that their situation was not so dire. He suggested that Nadia, once on their soil without allies, would be all alone and unable to carry out any significant action. Moreover, the Marquis assumed that Nadia would quickly encounter the inhospitality shown to her by the servants, which, coupled with the harsh weather conditions of the area, would make her wish to return back home as soon as possible. In this way, the Marquis demonstrated his ability to look at things realistically and optimistically, viewing the upcoming marriage not as a disaster, but as a temporary inconvenience that could be turned to his advantage. And when Nadia runs away from him, he won't even have anything to do with it because he won't take a single action towards it. In the atmosphere of the opulent hall, where chandeliers sparkled and silk dresses rustled, the event that was the culmination of the long-awaited wedding unfolded. After the exchange of vows, the guests gathered at the ball, where a spirit of celebration was in the air, mixed with the subtle scent of mockery directed toward Nadia. The nobles gathered in this room did not miss the opportunity to whisper behind her back, exchanging caustic remarks about her. Her father, meanwhile, spread his tail like a peacock, proud of the intrigue he felt had played into their family's hands. Nadia, meanwhile, was facing a challenge she was determined to confront. The intended dance with the Marquis, a man whose facial expression did not hide irritation, was a test for her. Putting on the mask of a carefree and in-love girl, she tried to convince everyone around her in her harmlessness and frivolity, while in the depths of his soul boiled quite different feelings. Observing the Marquis's behavior as he became more cautious of her and her family, Nadia realized that she had a new challenge ahead of her. She needed not only to save face in front of high society, but also to show the Marquis that she is not a threat, that she is not an enemy, but rather a player in this complex and dangerous game of noble intrigue. In this shimmering hall, where every step and every glance could mean much more than met the eye, Nadia prepared to enter into a dance with the Marquis. This was not just the performance of a social ritual, it was an action filled with deep subtexts and secret intentions. She had to act convincingly, for much depended on her ability to persuade. She was ready to accept this challenge, using all her wit, charm, and subtle flair to turn the situation in her favor, showing the Marquis that he could see her as an ally, not a threat. During the course of the evening, as the music filled the room, creating an atmosphere of lightness and celebration, Nadia, with a twinkle in her eyes, turned to her partner without hiding her admiration and called him beautiful. Her words, light and playful, hung in the air for a moment like a challenge to current norms and rules. Glenn, whose face was frozen in a mask of arrogance, reminded her to use his title, Market, emphasizing the distance between their worlds. However, Nadia, unruly and bold, continued to address him by his first name, showing her independence and ignoring the walls of protocol he tried to erect between them. Suddenly, In the midst of this tense dialogue, their dance was interrupted. The Duke, a man with a commanding gaze and an unyielding posture, intervened like a thundercloud, destroying the lightness of the ball. His words were full of challenge and skepticism toward Nadia. He said that he doubted Nadia's ability to maintain her smile and lightness of heart in the harsh north, as if throwing down the gauntlet to her in the face of the assembled society. This moment was a test not only for Nadia, but for everyone present. For his words were not just a challenge to her personally, but a hidden test of her spirit and perseverance. Thus, in this room, where every moment was filled with a dance of words and looks, a drama unfolded in which Nadia became the central figure. Her determination and courage in ignoring formalities and responding directly to challenges emphasized her relentlessness and willingness to stand up for herself. In this confrontation with the Duke, who tried to question her ability to withstand hardship, Nadia had found a new challenge that was now to be accepted and overcome. The moment the splendor of the ball seemed too stuffy for Nadia, she decided to seek solitude on the balcony, where the fresh air seemed the only escape from the tense atmosphere inside. Her soul was weary from the mask of joy she had been forced to wear this evening. That's why she wanted to rest. But suddenly, amidst the silence of the night, a voice sounded, interrupting her loneliness. It was Jiho, the person who seemed to be the last person who should have been here at this moment. At his question about her reasons for disliking her impending marriage to him, Nadia froze for a moment. After all, this very question went to the heart of her struggle, the inner conflict between duty and the desire to live differently. Contrary to the conventional wisdom that marriage should be a favorable transaction or a strategic alliance, Nadia was looking for something more, something that neither status nor wealth could offer her. Jiho, having entered into a conversation with Nadia, tried to understand her motives in an effort to unravel the mystery of her heart. His question left no room for easy answers. It demanded that Nadia expose her true feelings and desires. In this unexpected evening dialogue, under a starry sky, the story of two hearts, each searching for their own path to happiness, unfolded. Nadia, standing on the threshold of a new life, suddenly discovered that Jiho clearly had some motives for marrying Nadia from the beginning, since he was so eager to get to the bottom of the matter. Jiho, standing in front of Nadia under the velvet cover of night, expressed his sincere bewilderment at the sudden change in their fortunes. He wanted to delve deeper into understanding why Nadia was so insistent on changing established plans, despite the possible consequences. To Nadia, however, his questions sounded like echoes of distant and not fully understood premonitions. It was hard for her to imagine why Jiho seemed so interested in a marriage that itself seemed more like an arrangement between families than a sincere heart's desire. In response to his direct question about the reasons for her decision, Nadia decided to put everything on the line by deciding to test his true intentions. She sarcastically suggested that if the marriage proposal was for his sister and not herself, Jiho might not have shown any hesitation for the opportunity to elevate his status. Her words were sharp as a razor, and they cut through the silence between them, leaving behind only a loud silence. This silence was filled with unspoken questions and hidden emotions, creating an invisible chasm between two hearts that may have been searching for ways to reach each other, but had not yet found common ground. Nadia, having made her move, watched Jiho's reaction, trying to figure out his true feelings and intentions. In that moment, their relationship appeared before them like a mirror that reflected their doubts, hopes, and fears. It was a test to see if a bridge of understanding and mutual respect could connect their separated worlds. As the evening air filled with unspoken words, Nadia, with dignity and firmness, uttered words that reeked with the coldness of disagreement and separation. She confidently stated that between her and Jiho lies a chasm of misunderstanding and differences that cannot be crossed. With those words, she slowly gave in to her determination to leave the place where the echoes of their meeting hovered, leaving Jiho trapped in solitude and reflection under the open sky of the balcony. Her footsteps, despite her determination, led Nadia no further than to a secluded gazebo where the light of the lanterns gave the illusion of privacy and peace. It became a place of reflection where she could stop and think for a moment, not knowing that this was where a new challenge would come upon her. Karain appeared like a shadow from behind Nadia's back, unseen and unnoticed until she wanted to make herself public. She approached Nadia with a heavy heart, but also with an unwavering confidence in her own words. With sadness and resentment in her voice, Karain turned to Nadia, blaming her actions for casting a shadow on their family's reputation, a stain that would not be easily washed away. She expressed her belief that Nadia's decision to marry Glenn was spurred on, and jealousy stemming from long-standing childhood resentments and feelings of inferiority. In Karain's opinion, it was all about fatherly attention, which she felt was unfairly distributed among the sisters, leaving Nadia in the shadows. So, under the cover of night, in the silence of the secluded gazebo, Karain's words became an echo of misunderstanding and separation echoing between the sisters, adding a crack to an already fragile relationship. The moment Karain's words came down on Nadia like a cold rain of accusations, claiming that Nadia was only a puppet in their father's hands, the atmosphere between the sisters became even more tense. Nadia, keeping her tone light and maintaining an ironic smile, replied to Karain as if tossing the ball back in her direction. She assumed that now that she had chosen her own spouse, ignoring her father's preferences, the latter would probably turn his eyes to Karain to set her up with Ji-ho. Those words made Karain lose control, and she, seized by a flash of anger, grabbed Nadia's clothes, shrieking that she would never be a scum like Nadia. In this sudden fit of rage and despair, as emotions ran high and the conversation turned to shouting and resentment, Nadia saw something that stopped the flow of her thoughts for a moment. Around Karain's neck, like a symbol of unsolved mysteries and untold stories, hung Nadia's mother's pendant. This pendant, cherishing a piece of the past, filled the moment with a special meaning, giving what was happening even more drama and depth. The sight of this pendant, a link to her past, was an unexpected reminder to Nadia that despite all their differences, there was something that would forever remain between them, the legacy of their family, carried by their hearts. When Nadia's gaze fixed on the pendant, Karain immediately realized the reason for that attention. With the icy coldness that characterized her in moments of the most acute conflict, she removed the pendant from her own neck, as if casting off the shackles of the past. With menace in her voice, Karain reminded Nadia of the bitter truth of their family history, how their father had gifted Nadia's mother with that pendant when he still believed she would give him a son, not the daughter Nadia had become. This pendant, which was supposed to be a symbol of hopes and expectations, has turned into a heavy reminder of disappointments. Karain, as if testing Nadia, stated that if she wanted the pendant back, she would have to stoop to the humiliation of kneeling. Otherwise, Karain would throw the item into the lake without regret, deepening the chasm between his own soul and the past that this pendant represented. To Karain, the pendant was no more than an empty trinket, an object associated with a woman she considered only her father's concubine, not worthy of attention or respect. This moment was a test not only for their sisterly bond, but also for each of them personally. Karain, demonstrating his power and superiority, and Nadia, facing a choice between her own dignity and her desire to keep her mother's memory alive. This development plunged them into even deeper reflections on the meaning of family bonds and the value of the memories they carried through time. Recently, the atmosphere between Karain and Nadia had become increasingly tense. Karain couldn't help but notice how Nadia was acting more and more arrogant by the day, and it made her deeply annoyed. She secretly hoped that the moment would come when Nadia would realize her mistakes and change, but she never expected what their disagreement would lead to. The situation came to a climax when, without warning, Nadia, as if moved by a sudden rush of emotion, pushed Karain. This unexpected gesture of strength caught Karain off guard, and she found herself in the cold embrace of the water. Immersed in the water, she experienced a momentary bout of anger, promising herself that she would find a way to get back at Nadia for this act. However, the moment of retribution quickly lost its poignancy when Nadia, standing at the water's edge, expressed her emotions through an important symbol, her mother's pendant. Holding it in her hands, she stated that if it wasn't for her decisive action, Karain would never have gotten this valuable item back. This moment was a turning point in their relationship, making Karain reconsider her views and realize how poorly she knew her sister. In her past life, Nadia had already trusted Karain and lost that pendant, and she wouldn't make that mistake again. Nadia, with a tremor in her voice and hardness in her gaze, began a conversation that seemed to be the culmination of years of thought. She admitted that she has struggled with misunderstandings her whole life, trying to uncover the roots of Karain's hatred for her. 20 years of reflection had brought her to a sad realization. There seemed to be no good reason for Karane's deep irritation. This realization made Nadia reconsider her views and at one point decide to give Karane a real reason to hate her. Those words, spoken with such heavy inner meaning, made Karane feel vulnerable. For the first time in years, she saw in front of her not just a sister, but someone willing to cross the line, changing the usual course of their relationship. The change in Nadia's voice and look, her uncharacteristic determination, filled Karane with consternation, making her look at Nadia from a completely different angle. It was at this point, when the tension was at its peak, that the sound of rushing to the rescue was heard. Attracted by Karane's screams, the locals arrived to make sense of what was happening. Their appearance interrupted the escalating conflict, bringing in elements of the outside world and reality. With strength and determination, they pulled Karane out of the water, preventing further violence. Following them to the scene was their father, whose expression spoke volumes. The anger and disappointment reflected in his gaze indicated a deep concern for the fate of their family's honor. His arrival added even more gravity to the situation, emphasizing the importance of resolving the conflict not only for the sisters, but for the entire family. Carrion, flustered and clearly infuriated, roused the air with an accusation directed at Nadia. With bitterness and resentment in her voice, she revealed to the audience the fact of her recent fall into the water. Carrion's words pierced the silence. She claimed Nadia, acting with cold premeditation, dropping her into the cold embrace of the water elemental. Nadia, however, with her talent for drama and her refined manner of speaking, easily repelled the accusation like a skillful swordsman deflects his opponent's blows. With a twinkle in her eye and an unshakable confidence in her righteousness, Nadia raised her head to answer the accusation. Her words were measured and heartfelt, assuring her that her intentions were only good, warning Carrion of the dangers of standing on the edge of a precipice or a body of water. Nadia emphasized that the lies coming from Carrion cast a shadow of shame on their family, making the blow even more painful. But true emotions and feelings were not so easily hidden under a mask of calm and prudence. The anger that bubbled in Carrion's heart took over, and like a volcano, she spewed out a torrent of words that thoughtlessly revealed the much darker pages of their family history. In the heat of her rage, she casually recounted a moment when she threatened Nadia with her mother's pendant, an object of not only material, but also deeply emotional value to Nadia, as many knew. Carrion's words, spoken amidst a flare of emotion, were fatal. The crowd, who had only watched the spectacle unfold before them, now saw the full picture. The epiphany came instantly, and everyone present could see Carrion's true nature, her nasty temper that had been hidden behind a mask of innocence and resentment for so long. This moment was a turning point, exposing the true faces and motives behind both sisters' actions, leaving those present in deep reflection on how often the truth remains hidden behind a thin veil of perceptions and prejudices. Carrion, burdened with guilt and resentment after her involuntary confession, faced the inevitable consequence of her actions. Her father's anger and disappointment. Her attempts to justify herself could hardly make a difference. The words flew into the void without understanding or sympathy. The father, possessing not only the authority of the head of the family, but also the desire to save face before his guests, prevented further public scandal. His orders were adamant. Carrion was to retire to her room, remove herself from the public eye, and perhaps face her own mistakes. The servant, doing his master's bidding, took Carrion away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and regrets. The father, however, not wanting family discord to mar the evening, hastened to apologize to the guests in an effort to smooth over the awkwardness of the situation. His actions emphasized the importance of reputation and harmony in the home, even if it meant sacrificing his own family ties. Nadia, meanwhile, watched the unfolding events with amazement and perhaps hidden satisfaction. She was surprised that her father was not supportive of Carrion, perhaps expecting a different reaction from him. But what was most important to Nadia was the outcome of the situation. She was still in possession of her mother's precious jewelry, a key artifact of her family history. Now that the jewelry was in her hands, Nadia could plan her future and move north, seeking a new life or perhaps redemption for past mistakes. Thus, Each character in the story continued on his or her way, intertwining complex destinies, acting under the influence of circumstances, their own desires and ambitions. And every action, every decision had consequences, changing the course of their story, bringing in new turns of the plot. At this time, in the woods near Winterfell, Fabian brought up the fact that he thought Nadia's feelings seemed genuine. Glenn was in no mood to discuss such nonsense, however, and pushed Fabian away.